So welcome to everybody to BOBMK, and as you may or may not know, that stands for Berkshire, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. It's an organisation that was set up some 20 years ago as a mutual support body for those officers of local authorities involved in urban and landscape design in particular, but public realm and the way we live has expanded that category altogether. And welcome to the webinar on local transport, note LTN 120. This is a cycling revolution, and also a 193-page bit of government guidance on the provision and design of cycle infrastructure. Thanks for joining the session today. We hope you'll find that the presentations and the discussions are useful. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm John Rowland. Hello. And I'm Director of John Rowland Urban Design, and I'm also Chair of the BOBMK organization. So today we have three very interesting speakers who will talk in the following order. On your right, I guess it is Phil Jones, who is chair of PJA, a Phil Jones Associate, a consultancy which has been advising the government on movement and responsible for manual for streets. On my left at the top is Patrick Lingwood, who is active travel leader at Oxford County Council, charged with ensuring that LTN 120 is embedded into county highways thinking, something that's desperately needed. And down on my left is Irina Merryweather, who is Group Urban Designer for Taylor Wimpey, who will talk about the impact of LTN 120 on the design of their housing schemes. So it's three important perspectives. Phil Jones, who is our first speaker. Now, I've known Phil for many years, and we've worked together on some groundbreaking projects, in particular at the award-winning Telford Millennium Community. He's the chairman and founder of PJA and has over 30 years experience in the planning and design of development infrastructure, with particular expertise in traffic analysis, transport planning, and highway design. He's been involved in numerous policy documents and changes to the highway code, as well as Manual for Streets 1 and 2. So today, he will be giving us an overview of both gear change and LTN 120 and their application. So over to you, Phil.
Great, thank you, John. No, I haven't got Telford in here, but perhaps Irina will show it. Great, thank you. So yeah, gear change. Interesting document. So as John said, we were involved in the preparation of the LTN 120, and we actually finished it last year, and we thought it was going to come out as LTN 119. So in 2019, in the end, it didn't. Because of the pandemic and various other delays, it didn't come out until this summer. And when it did appear, it appeared with this other document that we weren't anticipating, those on the consultant side. And it's gear change, which is billed as a cycling and walking plan for England. So it's a policy document of the Department for Transport. And actually, I would argue, puts greater weight on gear change, on the LTN 120, than just the document itself, as I'll explain. So he talks about one thing, needing to see a step change in cycling. We've kind of heard that before, but perhaps without such force. And because this came out during the pandemic, it talks about this being a unique opportunity. We all saw how much cycling increased during the summer as traffic levels declined, and gear change sees that as kind of silver lining, a positive, and get England moving differently, as it says there. So some interesting announcements as part of gear change. It talks about a new Quango, a new body and inspectorate. So this is could be said to be a replacement for Cycling England, which was abolished some years ago, but actually with more teeth. So now it's talked of as an inspectorate, and talks about a new high-level appointment, a new cycling and walking commissioner who will lead Active Travel England. And then he talks about some sticks and carrots that will apply to local highway authorities. To receive government funding for local highways investment, there will be a presumption that all new schemes will deliver or improve cycling infrastructure. And that's not cycling schemes, that's local highways investment, full stop. And then talks about £2 billion of new investment. So one of the, I saw on the poll that came in, a lot of people were saying lack of funding. Well, government says they are making good on that, and there is now a pipeline of long-term funding that's going to be available for cycling and walking schemes. Gear Change then introduced LTN 120, and it's kind of interesting when you look at the language. LTN 120 is a local transport note, and those are normally referred to by the Department for Transport as guidance to local highway authorities who can set their own standards. But Gear Change talks about standards. It calls LTN 120 a standard. So we will set much higher standards. We have today produced new cycling design guidance, which sets out the highest standards we will now require if schemes are to receive funding. And again, puts the strength on this with Active Travel England. These standards will be enforced by Active Travel England, and we will expect local authorities and developers to utilise the guidance. So this, I think, for the first time, government is putting significant weight behind a document that is published, and really saying to local authorities, we expect you to use this, and we will check whether you are using it. Gear Change summarises some of the key things that it's looking for, and talks about, and a lot of this is written with London experience, obviously, but it is now saying this applies in the whole of England. And we can see from London that physically segregated bike tracks on main roads are the most important thing we can do to promote cycle use. So where these schemes have gone in, these high quality protected schemes, then we see a much broader range of people, a big increase in the number of people who are taking up cycling because it feels so much more comfortable. It also talks about, though, creating streets where there are low volumes of motor traffic, so that it is made more conducive to cycling. And we've seen a lot of that recently with the changes during the pandemic, the so-called low traffic neighbourhoods. And Gear Change talks about creating a community right to close side streets and create these low traffic neighbourhoods with groups of residential side streets able to petition local authorities. Now, obviously, local people can petition already, so it's quite interesting to see how this will actually be achieved in practice. But the thoughts are quite clear here. This is what Gear Change is really talking about, empowering local people to do that. And it also talks about mini Hollands. This is a photograph from the Waltham Forest Mini Holland, one of 3 outer London boroughs that were given significant investment by TfL to promote walking and cycling, to enable it by closing rat runs. And with the success of that, and they have been very successful, government is saying we will choose up to 12 willing non-London local authority areas to benefit from this kind of investment. Gear Change also has a lot to say, though, about new developments, and it's clear that we want new developments. The government says we want new developments to be easily and safely accessible and navigable by foot and bike, and to make existing cycling and walking provision better. And interestingly, as we can see there, one of the functions of Active Travel England will be a statutory consultee within the planning system. So it will not only be exerting influence on highway authorities, but also on planning authorities. So that's by way of a little bit of background, and put hopefully LTN 120 into context. So what is it? So it's a local transport note. It replaces the former LTN 208, which had the same title, Cycle Infrastructure Design, came out in 2008, and really a lot has changed since then. And it also replaces LTN 112 on shared use, and I'll say a little bit more about shared use. It applies in England and, interestingly, Northern Ireland. Wales has its own standards, and Scotland is developing new guidance standards too. So it really applies in the whole of England. And again, in the foreword, he talks about significant increases in cycling, and the quality must sharply improve. and reiterates the point that's made in gear change. It will be a condition of any future government funding for new cycle infrastructure that's designed in a way that's consistent with the LTN 112. But furthermore, government funding for local highways investment where the main element is not cycling or walking, there will be a presumption that schemes must deliver to these standards. And interestingly, even where schemes, developer funded schemes, are not funded by government, still Active Travel England will want to vet the performance of local highway authorities in applying LTN 112, and that may affect future funding generally for highway authorities. So Active Travel England is being talked about as winning quite a big stick. So what's changed from last time? Really from LTN 208, for the first time, DFT has set out quite clearly what is considered acceptable when it comes to cycle infrastructure. LTN 208, those of you familiar with it, had something called a hierarchy of provision, and what that meant was that it really was quite sceptical about cycle tracks and creating high quality cycle tracks, the kind of things that we've seen now in many cities, particularly London. And therefore it said that the first thing that should be done is to reduce the speed and volume of motor traffic to make cycling on the carriageway acceptable, and only then would you go down to do other things. LTN 120 doesn't say that. It says actually there are three types of cycle route. We can have mixed traffic on quiet, slow streets if the motor traffic is slow enough, or we can have a motor traffic free route along a canal or through green space, or we can have protected space on Main Street, and all of those can be good. So it doesn't matter which of those you choose to make up the network depending on local conditions. We haven't seen junction design to this level of detail before in the previous LTN. And as you can see from the photograph here, this is a chap on a recumbent cycle, disabled cyclist. There's a much stronger emphasis on designing for a wider range of people to cycle throughout the document. And that's really what underpins this table. So there are this table sets out putting aside cycling through green spaces. This is saying at what points in terms of the speed and volume of motor traffic do we achieve conditions that will enable most people to cycle. And in the past we've had graphs with a line above and below the line, and would say above the line you would segregate and below the line you would integrate. This is saying actually even on a very quiet street there's nothing to prevent us having a fully curbed protected cycle track even on 20 miles an hour street with low volumes of traffic if the space is available and you want to do that. And that's coloured green and says it's provision suitable for most people. And as you work along, as you work down the graph and speed limit increases and the volume of traffic increases, then you can see that it's only that fully curbed cycle track that still gives you a green condition. And mixed traffic, which is where you're mixing with motor vehicles, is really only suitable for most people on 20 mile an hour streets with pretty low levels of motor traffic, around 2,000 vehicles a day. So what this is saying, it's not about what's safe, because the image on the top right could be regarded for someone who's confident as a good place to cycle, but it wouldn't attract the people in the bottom photograph to go out there. So if we are going to get a wider range of people, then we have to do better. So those types of condition, we can have, this again is Waltham Forest before and after. We can have mixed traffic where we've got low volumes and slow motor traffic, that's fine for cycling. Or we can have routes along green spaces, they can be fine, very attractive. Or we can have space for cycling within highways. And those can be three types. We can have fully curbed cycle tracks, which are protected up above the level of the traffic with a high curb and a buffer strip. Or we can have stepped cycle tracks, which is almost like a raised cycle lane, the kind of thing that's common in Denmark. Or we can have what's now called light segregation, where we have intermittent obstacles, quite low cost, and perhaps a painted buffer as in the bottom example. And that fully curbed track, it can be at different levels. It can be at the carriageway level or an intermediate level or at footway level. And the point that we're making here is that if you put cyclists at the footway level, it should be regarded as a cycle track, not shared use. So shared use is now reserved for just where we have no distinction at all between the pedestrian space and the cycle space. And so a white line is not good enough to be a cycle track. A cycle track at footway level should be in different material and separated by something raised and physical rather than just a white line. So as I said, junctions and crossings, we now see much more detail in terms of the document as to what is acceptable when it comes to junctions. And so some examples. This is the kind of thing that you might see. This is actually in North Fringe of Bristol. We can separate out. We should be separating out cyclists and pedestrians. They move at different speeds. So just because we have staggered crossings and we can only get pedestrians across one part of the junction, one arm of the junction during the red phase for traffic, cycles go much faster and so perhaps can go all the way across. So we need to think more creatively about how we handle cycles at signals. We can do things like parallel crossings. This is where we have a zebra plus a cycle track, been legal since 2016, and quite a few places are beginning to put these in now. We should be thinking about priority at side roads. If we're taking cyclists off the carriageway, then if we make them give way at every side road, then they won't want to use those off carriageway facilities. So we can use different levels of setback depending on how far the crossing is from the main road. We can mark the priority with a parallel crossing, or we just give way lines, or we can use design techniques to show that cyclists have priority, and that's what we should be doing as a norm. So here's an example from Enfield, Mini Holland, showing a full setback using marked priority, so there's space there for a car to wait off the carriageway, and the giveaway markings that say that legally the cyclist has priority over traffic on that side road. Here's an example in Birmingham where we have a partial setback. It's not enough to shelter the car, so it does interrupt the through traffic on the road when on the main road when there's someone crossing, and we use a parallel crossing to give priority to pedestrians and cyclists across the side road junction. There's been a lot of innovation recently in terms of traffic signals. This is just one example, again from Waltham Forest, using what's called we call in the document a circulating cycle stage, but others call it cyclops. Effectively, all motor traffic is held on a red stage, and pedestrians and cyclists can go then, and cyclists, because they go faster, can make a right turn as they go around two sides of the square. And this is how Manchester are doing it. Very similar, except that they believe that it's better to reverse the order of the pedestrian and cycle crossings, but the staging and the design is pretty much the same. When it comes to roundabouts, then we can have conventional roundabouts. Sorry, I should say conventional roundabouts where cyclists are mixing with traffic. They're very dangerous, and that's pointed out within LTN 120. So the two approaches, again, like mixed and separated, when it's low flows